Welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. This is the 102nd video in our Master Series and the second video in our subgroup processing. This isn't actually a subgroup, but we're talking to just really quick a deal with your individual tracks. The first thing on individual tracks, if you watched the last video, that I explained to you to try to render any delays or detunings that you've done to those individual tracks, to render them. Save a copy of it, make really good notes about what delays and detunings you did on it, and then render the track, transform it to rendered audio, so it doesn't have to perform all that work in real time. That's the first thing. The second thing is on your individual tracks to make sure that you have put on your spatialization preset. On this mix, I've decided that St. Petersburg Cathedral with this analog delay set up the way it is as an echo type of effect to add spatialization that's going in every individual track and every subgroup bus to be added in there as much as possible that I want when I start mixing it together. Now you can go through now and start adding some of that in there and say, yeah, that sounds really good like that. I've added that much, reverb, and then I've added that much analog delay up underneath it, and it sounds great like that. Yeah, dude. Just remember when you get into the mix that you might want to change that because it might not be enough or it might be too much, depending on what's going on all in the mix. On a smaller production, a lot of times you get it sounding really good and it'll be fine. On a bigger production, it might not. It might be too much, causing mud in the mix, or you just don't have enough in there to where, it's got, giving it to spatialization sound that you're really looking for. So, those are the first two things, and I normally will turn them off then. And then anything else that you might be doing, most of the time, that on those individual tracks, you've really sound sculpted them well. You've really gone through everything we've talked about so far and done a really good job of it, so you probably don't have a lot of work to do on those individual tracks. So basically the only thing I suggest you put a couple equalizers on there. The first equalizer is going to be set up to do high and low pass filtering to cut out any unneeded content. Once you start mixing it into the mix, you can start cutting out low and high end content to increase clarity and to keep it out of some other instrument's frequency range so that it doesn't muddy it and reduce clarity, and doing maybe some notch filtering for reductive EQ. And also an equalizer after that to equalize that track. Once you get it in the mix, you might be doing some high and low pass filtering on it, and then you re-equalize a little bit. You might all of a sudden realize, start out going by where the equal loudness contour dictates, and you might come into the understanding that, well, no, it's just fine in the bass end, but it needs to get kicked up a little bit here, or pulled down a little bit here. The high end needs to come up a little bit. Well, now that I've got it mixed in the mix, and yeah, now that individual track sounds perfect like that. Yeah, now in the mix it sounds great. Oh yeah, because these simple processes basically is why we had talked about that. The processing at the very end of the mix hopefully should be very simple. And it might be, you might also have a stereo track here that you might want to put a stereo field enhancing plug-in on, or something like that. Or you might have a plug-in that lets you put delays and detunings on one side of it or another. Or you might have done some work on some type of, you might have some type of plug-in in your DAW like this that will let you split the frequencies or split the channels. Does that make sense? And that kind of stuff you're going to want to render. More than likely, depending on what all type of work you did, just make really good notes about it so that you got your computer as free as possible. The more CPU power you got on your computer, if you've got a NASA computer, well, and it can handle running Beijing, well, great, bro. You don't have to worry about nothing. But not everybody that I've seen working on music productions do. So it's something to take into consideration. So basically, and you can turn those off also. So basically all your insets you can turn off until you get into mixing, which we're going to start in the next video. That way you're basically getting yourself set up to deal with this individual track as you're falling back, being able to fall back to that individual track. First of all, you'll have that spatialization preset set up that we talked about at the end of processing, and you've got a couple equalizers on there to do any work that you may need to do to make that individual track sound as good as it can in the mix, because right now by itself you've done all kinds of work on it and it sounds awesome, but once you bring it into the mix, you might have to cut out some of the low end to make room for something else, or cut out some of the high end to make room for something else, or it's got too much high end because in the mix now it sounds great by itself, but in the mix it doesn't sound good, and you might have to do some equalization work on it to try to clean it up a little bit, or you might boost it in some areas to make it stand out, to help preserve its identity in the mix, or attenuate in some areas that are making it not stand out well like you want it to in the mix, whereas by itself it sounds fine. And that's okay, because that's normally a given. Sometimes you just got to do that. The smaller the production is, the less you have to fuss with that. You got a little small production, it's got a guitar and a bass and a drummer, and a vocalist, it's like, it's not really likely you're going to have to worry about it a whole lot, because they are all the sound coming there. But the more stuff you add in, the more that it can become a problem, to where you have to start readjusting things and fixing things so they sound good and complement the production, rather than just be an individual, unless they're the out front track. If they're the out front track, they can be whatever the hell they want. But if they're supportive, or they're backing tracks, that you may need to do some other work on them to make them complementary to the rest of the mix. So I hope you enjoyed this second video in our subgroup processing, and get your individual tracks set up for mixing, because we're going to start mixing in the next video, and I'll see you there. Peace, hope, love.